Hey guys, welcome to my Living with BMW's XM video. I was lucky enough to drive a pre-production XM about 18 months ago out in Austria, and then I went to the official launch in Arizona back in March, I think it was, where they also launched the G87 M2. I might have mentioned this already, but my theory is the XM was originally designed to be a flagship BMW, a super high-end luxury SUV to cater for markets like the Middle East, like China, like the States. And towards the end of development, again, this is my theory and I could be completely wrong, I think they decided to throw it to BMW M and make it a flagship M car and a standalone M product. So this time my plan was to approach the XM as an X, a super high-end, super powerful, super luxury BMW, but not something that I'm expecting to get some driving thrills out of, not something that should feel as dynamic as my M3 Touring. And I think that is the best way to approach this particular car, because then your expectations around driving dynamics aren't up here and you focus on other areas. I've talked about the styling on this car a few times already, and I have to say it's not really my cup of tea. Although the fact that this particular press car is in Dravit Grey, which is the same colour as my M3 Touring, and it's probably the most subtle spec you could get your XM in. I don't think subtle and XM really can be used in the same sentence, but if they can, then this is as close as you're going to get to that. And I have to say, living with this car for the past 9 days, some of its looks have grown on me. I actually quite like the front end. I'm still not convinced by these sort of split headlamps when we get around the side of the XM. Just like the iX, I think it's very square and boxy, and I don't particularly like the square wheel arches. And then when we get around the back of the car, well, the styling itself's not too bad. I'm not a big fan of the stacked quad exhausts, and I don't like the fact that they haven't put a BMW Randall in the middle of the boot. But once again, styling is objective, and that's just my personal, honest opinion. Remember, the XM is a plug-in hybrid. And in the boot, you'll find this rather trendy looking bag with XM written on it. It has a 25.7 kilowatt hour battery, which gives this car a realistic range of about 80 kilometers or 50 miles. And it will go on to a top speed electric only of 140 kilometers per hour, which is more than fast enough for Australia, and in fact, quick enough for the majority of motorway speeds back in Europe. And the electric motor on its own produces almost 200 horsepower and 280 newton meters of torque. So it is enough to keep up with everyday traffic. Where this falls a little bit short is its charging capacity. It will only charge at up to 7.4 kilowatts, which means plugging in overnight essentially. You can also use the combustion engine, which we'll talk about in a second, to charge the battery when you're driving it. You can control how much recuperation is going on, and obviously when you're on the brakes or off the throttle, especially going downhill, it's adding some range back into that battery. And underneath this massive Dravit Grey bonnet, we'll find BMW's S68, which is a 4.4 litre V8 twin turbo. In this car, it produces 489 horsepower, which is actually quite modest. And I know that that S68 is capable of producing well over 600 horsepower, but remember, it's mated to that electric motor. So when you combine this combustion engine and that electric motor, the XM has a combined available maximum output of 653 horsepower. I think that's 480 kilowatts for my Australian viewers, and 800 newton meters of torque, which does sound like really big numbers, but this does weigh about 2.7 tons. All of that power and torque runs through the brilliant ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox and is fed to the ground via BMW's M xDrive system. It's not a fully switchable system like it is in the M3, 4, 5 and 8, but it does have a couple of different settings. In default, it starts up in four-wheel drive. You can switch it to four-wheel drive sport, which sends more power and torque to the rear axle, and it has four-wheel drive sand, which I guess is catering for the Middle Eastern market. And BMW claim this car will do the 0 to 62 miles an hour sprint or 100 kilometers per hour sprint in just 4.3 seconds. And I'm pretty certain it would probably do that come rain or shine because it has so much traction. In the UK, the XM starts at £150,000. There's not many options to add on to that. There's a few colour options. There's the bigger wheel option, which this car's got 23 inch. It comes standard with 22 inch. And a few other things like a tow bar. And I'm sure it's very similar in Australia because Australian spec BMWs always tend to come pretty much fully loaded. And these retail at $300,000 in Australia, which is exactly the same as in the UK, except in the UK, £150,000 retail is on the road, whereas in Australia, I think they pay about $20,000 extra for their on-road taxes. Where do we start? Driving position, spot on. I feel like I'm in a BMW, which is a good thing. Everything's very comfortable. Ergonomically, everything's perfect. It's a really nice car to sit in and cruise around in. You can rest your elbow on the center console here and on the door card, and everything just works perfectly well. A lot of that has to do with the fact that these seats are the brilliant seats out of the F90 M5. Yes, they have some fancy patterns in them because they're in an XM, but fundamentally underneath they are the F90 M5 seats, which I absolutely love and I rave on about loads because they are so adjustable, they are so comfortable, and they're really supportive, definitely supportive enough for a vehicle like this. On top of that, they're heated, which I definitely don't need today, and ventilated, which I do need. And actually that's reminded me, so let's crank that up right away because that is a lovely feature to have out here in Australia. We have the curved display, which is no surprise because that is in pretty much every BMW on sale today. In here we have two very useful cup holders that are heated and cooled, so you can keep your coffee warm in the winter and you can keep your cold drinks cold in the summer, and they're really, really useful. I've been using them loads over the past 9 days. Everything else is very familiar to me. This is the same wheel that's in my M3 with the same carbon paddles and the same M1 and M2 buttons. Down here, it's fundamentally the same, but there is a hybrid button because obviously you can play around if you go into the setup menu with energy recovery, so recuperation. You can have that at max or at minimum. So when you come off the throttle when you're on max, it decelerates a bit harder than you're probably normally used to because it's regenerating as high as possible or to the maximum capacity as possible. And when you put it in minimum, it feels more like your typical combustion engine only car. We have this giant cutout roof panel above us, but it doesn't have an operational sunroof or even glass panel on the roof. It's just for decoration. It's stacked with ambient lighting, currently purple, so the rest of the car and the ambient lighting, all the trims, etc. are purple. But when you change that, obviously everything else changes. The younger generation absolutely love that feature, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Jumping in the rear bench, it is so comfortable back there. I think that is one of the best rear benches in any car, and that is what sets this particular model apart from, let's say, BMW's very own X5 or X6. The rear benches in those cars don't come close to the comfort of the rear bench in this. That is 7 Series luxury back there, and that is a big tick for anyone that wants to carry around rear seat passengers, whether they're your kids or whether you're using this car as a chauffeur or a limo. Anyone in the back is not going to be unhappy. There are a couple of cheaper plastics in here that do stand out, like these speaker surrounds on the doors and like this funny strip of plastic that is on the passenger side of the dashboard. Not sure why they use that, along with the slightly, in my opinion, tacky M badge. But if you ignore those two things, the rest of the cabin is beautiful. I think it's time that we get this car out on the road. What has the XM been like to live with, and has it made more sense than it did in the brief couple of hours that I had it at the press launch in Arizona earlier this year? Well, as with many of my reviews, I want to start with the negatives that I've found, because like every car on sale today, it does have negatives, and if I don't point them out, then I feel like I'm not doing an honest enough review. And I think most people that are spending this kind of money on a car will probably already know about them. So the first one is the ride quality. It's not brilliant, it's not bad, but it's very stiffly sprung, it's very firm. And I'm sure that this car having the optional 23-inch wheels doesn't help with that. I think if you live in the UK, or in fact anywhere, and you don't mind having the slightly smaller but still ridiculously massive 22-inch wheels, then go with them, because you're going to get slightly bigger sidewall profile on your tyre, which in turn is going to give you a slightly better ride quality. I wouldn't say it's quite as stiffly sprung as, let's say, the X3M or X4M, but it's very close to the X5M or X6M. And I think this car, and who I perceive it's pitched at, just needs a slightly plusher ride. You'll never get out of comfort. Maybe if you're hammering along this road, you'd put it into Sport, but when you put it into Sport Plus, it genuinely feels like the springs have been replaced with a couple of blocks of wood. It's that stiff. But remember, it kind of has to be, because it's close to 3 tons in weight. And that's what I mean when I was talking in the intro about the car being a little bit confused around its identity, in my head at least. If you make a car like this handle, and if you make a car like this support its weight through tighter, twistier stuff like this, where it just shouldn't, unfortunately the negative side of that is, doesn't matter what you do, it has to be stiffly sprung. That is, unless they put air suspension on this car, and I think it kind of is maybe crying out a little bit for air suspension, because that would solve a lot of problems. And a lot of the bigger, sportier SUVs from other manufacturers do utilize air suspension to give you that support and to give you that plushness when you want it. The next slight negative is lack in steering feel, but that is something that I do talk about and complain about with the current M2, M3, M4. BMW just don't seem to have nailed their e-pass systems. The front axle is amazing, the grip, you know, the stability of this car, as we've already touched upon, is incredible, but I just wish there was a little bit more feel. Let's get on to the positives. A positive for this specific press car is its spec. I absolutely love Dravit Grey, and that's no secret, and I think it works really well with the XM. Means that it flies under the radar, and I know that sounds ridiculous, an XM flying under the radar, but this one really has. It hasn't attracted any attention really in traffic, busy pedestrian areas where there's lots of cars. I haven't caught anyone really looking at this car, and that might be a positive or a negative depending on what sort of customer or person you are. But the good thing is, if you want it to fly under the radar and not attract too much attention, you can go for a spec like this. If you want it to be a bit more standout, then you can go for a spec like the XM that I had out in Arizona. It was a bright red and it had gold accents all over it. So it is nice to see that the car can either fly under the radar or it can be quite a statement piece. We've talked about the interior of this car being a real standout feature, and I have to say it's been an absolute joy to live with. Melbourne, for those of you that aren't from here or haven't spent time in Melbourne recently especially, well, there's a lot of traffic in Melbourne. So I've spent tens of hours in this cabin, and I genuinely couldn't think of a better place, a better cabin to spend that sort of time in. The sound system in here is incredible. The insulation from the outside world is amazing, all of the double glazing, etc. The comfort of these seats we've already talked about, the infotainment. It's just a nice premium place to spend some time in. And in fact, last night I popped over to my good friends Emil and Sandra's house, and their kids came out for a little bit of a ride in the XM, and they were so excited by it. They loved all of this ambient lighting, they loved the rear seat, they loved the horsepower. I filmed a couple of little clips, so let's cut to those now and you can see firsthand just how excited they got about this car. What do you guys think of the car?
Really good.
What do you like about it in here?
The roof.
The roof.
I like the lights.
The lights and the patterns. And the seat, is it nice and comfortable back there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
I like the horsepower.
You like that? Which colour do you want all the stuff you can have?
Wait, can you?
Let's try green. There we go. How's that?
Yes!
When I select my M1 button, it automatically puts it into manual, so I can use the paddles, and well, the whole thing gets a little bit racy. The throttle response is really instantaneous because that hybrid energy now acts as a torque fill. So even if you're in, let's say, 5th gear here and I'm doing 75 k's, if I put my foot down, well, it's already a torquey combustion engine, I know that much, but when you add that electrical energy, it just fills these amazing pockets. And in fact, when I was coming up this hill earlier on, you could come out of switchbacks like this in 5th gear, put your foot down, and it would just pull really nicely. The V8's doing a bit of the work and the electrical motor is doing a bit of the work, but obviously then you're going to chew through your electrical energy all the time. If you want to charge up, then you can go into setup menu and engine recovery. I've got it in max, so when I'm coming down here, I'm off the throttle now, I can see it's charging up, it's charging up, it's charging up, and because it's quite a steep decline, I'm not losing any speed. And when I apply the brakes, well, it's charging even more. And in fact, in the 5-7 minutes that I've been running this video, I've actually gained about 5 kilometers because we've been predominantly going downhill. And obviously then that helps me when we head back up. For whatever reason, the manual ZF 8-speed gearbox is a little bit slower in this car. Sometimes you'll pull the paddle and there's a bit of a delay. It's not that it refuses to give you the gear, it just seems to think about it for a while, and I've never experienced that in any other ZF 8-speed calibration with BMWs, and I think that must have something to do with the hybrid calibration and the setup of it all, because I remember talking about that in the video in Arizona, or maybe it was the original video when I drove the pre-production car. It's not so bad that it will annoy you, but it is a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes the box does everything you want, but other times it just doesn't seem to react in the way that you think it should react. Let's now push on a little bit and see what the handling dynamics are like in this 2.7 ton SUV. Shouldn't be good, but I already know it is pretty remarkable. It just stays so flat and so composed, it's unreal. I've set the speed limiter to 100 k's per hour, which is the speed limit on this road, just to stop me from speeding, and there we go, we're at the speed limit. It's actually quite a good idea. I should do this more when I'm filming, because then I need to think about one less thing. Piling in here, I mean, there's so much grip. It's just I am now doing 100 through the corner, and it's nowhere near the sort of limit of grip in this thing. I mean, it is remarkable, but it's not giving me, at least, too much excitement or thrills like, say, an X5M would be. But there's no denying that it's just so capable. It's ridiculous. The XM is hardly cheap, but it certainly undercuts cars like Bentley's Bentayga and AMG's G-Wagon, and I think money no object, you'd be hard pushed to find a more extravagant and awesome family car. I mean, just judging by the kids' reactions yesterday, the space in here, it has a reasonably big boot as well. It really would make for a very, very good family car. And while I'm talking about that, well, I was down in the Portsea area yesterday. Once again, Australians, especially people from Melbourne, will know exactly where Portsea is and what it's all about. It's a very affluent and wealthy area. And whilst I was down there, I saw 2 other XMs, which is amazing because I haven't seen any XMs back home in the UK. So maybe those particular customers are using them for exactly that, you know, the ultimate sort of family transport. If it was my money and I wanted a big, luxurious, sporty SUV, I would probably end up buying an X5M Competition. And BMW have recently facelifted that car as well. It's about $60,000 less than this, £30,000. It's definitely dynamically better. It's more of an M car in my opinion, and I think it looks better to the majority of people. Certainly to me, it looks more traditionally like a BMW should look, albeit a big SUV. But having this for the past 9 days has made me understand more about what it is and the benefits that it has. I mean, an X5M doesn't have the hybrid setup. You can't cruise around in electric mode for 80 kilometers or 50 miles. It also doesn't have the comfort on the rear bench. It's just nowhere near as nice as the back of this cabin. So although it's what I would choose in my scenario, this car does have some unique features about it that you can't get in the rest of the BMW lineup, and in fact you can't really get in the rest of the premium SUV market. So I can see why it has a space, I can see why it's here today. As I've talked about a few times, I just wish that they hadn't labelled it an M car. They'd backed off the spring rates a little bit, maybe added air suspension, and I think it would have been a real special flagship BMW. It doesn't need the M badges. Everyone gets carried away with M badges, including BMW themselves. Massive thanks to Nick and BMW Australia for lending me this car for the past 9 days. It's been awesome to live with, and I look forward to picking up the iX1 tomorrow and sharing my thoughts with you lot on that car very soon. Until the next video, take it easy. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks a lot for the support as always. I'll see you very soon. Cheers.